Hi, and welcome to another edition of NCBI's podcast. My name is Kevin Kelly. I'm the head of policy and advocacy with NCBI. Over the last few months, we brought you a series of different interviews, and on today's episode, we thought it would be very timely to check in with our good friends in Feach to see how things are going for parents of children with vision impairments. Eithne is the advocacy officer with Feach. Eithne, thanks for joining me on the show.
No problem, Kevin. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome anytime. Eithne, I suppose, like everyone, COVID has been a real struggle and an unexpected struggle for parents.
It has, yeah. I suppose it's like everyone else. We were all shocked when it happened. Um, our kids were in school one day and they were at home the next, but it caused problems for all kids. But I suppose there was a special set of problems for kids who were blind and visually impaired. It became very obvious to us very quickly with the amount of traffic on our Facebook page and the amount of emails I was getting in that a lot of parents were finding it very stressful and having a lot of difficulties. A part of it was that everyone was sent home very quickly. So some kids came home with no equipment, so they didn't. I don't think people actually realised, okay, they're going to be homeschooled. They might have thought that in their head, but not thought the practicalities, which were, i.e., for visually impaired, you need to have access to the materials, which means you need your visualizer, you need your laptop, you need your books. So a lot of kids came home, first of all, without the materials. And second of all, there was no knowledge. The schools had no knowledge of what was going forward or what was happening. So after the initial everyone going home and everyone's safe, it was suddenly like, now we have to educate them. But a lot of the stuff that visually impaired and blind students needed was still left in school.
Yeah, things were exceptionally chaotic at the time when we look back to March, and when then Taoiseach Leo Varadkar made the statement from the steps in Washington about schools closing down, and school authorities and the department had to move rather quickly. But on talking to a number of parents that are involved with NCBI and to yourself over the last few months, I think children with special educational needs were somewhat forgotten, particularly in the early days.
Yeah, I think after the initial everyone's at home and we thought maybe we'd be home for a week or two and then with the Easter holidays we'd be all back again. But quickly became obvious that it was going to be for a long time. So there was the initial not the right materials and stuff going home, but then there was teachers dealing with the class as if everybody was fully sighted and everybody had the same abilities or didn't need any extra support. Whereas when you're in school, a lot of our children would get one-on-one resource support, or they'd have the help of an SNA to help them access materials. So kids were sitting at home, and some kids, the schools reacted and they set up things so they could access materials, but a lot of them simply didn't because they were in a situation of chaos. They didn't really think about them. Now, this is where problems really began to unfold, because you had some people who got in touch with schools and schools reacted immediately and sorted out the problems. However, you had others where there weren't great reactions and supports weren't increased. So, for example, I had a junior cert child and a leaving cert child. So leaving cert was absolutely fine, but junior cert, he was having real problems accessing all the materials, because some of them were on email, some were on programs that he couldn't read. Things like markers on boards weren't strong enough or thick enough. So all these things meant that he wasn't really having access to school or to his classes. Now, because I was at home and my work had stopped, I was able to sit beside him and help him, but that is not the normal situation at all. So a lot of parents who were at work or didn't have access to a second PC couldn't help their kids. So effectively they were sitting at home and not really being educated. Now we contacted the DES pretty quickly because we could tell this was happening, and we asked for some leadership or some guidelines for schools, because we had some schools doing Zoom classes, some schools doing WhatsApp, some schools contacting only by email. And we felt guidelines need to be, or instructions sent out to schools to say, look, resource classes should, where possible, go ahead, or there should be some one-on-ones with kids. However, this didn't really materialise because I think they were scrabbling with the whole Leaving Cert, Junior Cert thing, and mainstream school just kind of got forgotten about.
Yeah, there was a lot of scrambling around over the last few months, and the whole education piece, whether you look at the Leaving Cert, the Junior Cert, even the return to school, it's been probably the most chaotic in terms of planning when you look across broader government. And I was thinking there when you were listing out some of the challenges that parents experience, but even when the system is functioning in normal times before COVID, access to materials and technology in the home setting, that was already quite complicated and challenging in certain parts of the country.
It is, yeah. It is an ongoing issue. What I feel with COVID, what COVID did was it highlighted all our issues and doubled them. Okay, so while we always have these issues, this made them really apparent to everybody. I think another big issue was we have a visiting teacher service. So the visiting teachers would come and support the kids in school. When the schools closed, they kind of disappeared for a lot of people. Others stayed in touch, but there was a huge cohort that seemed to say, well, the schools are closed, so we can't do anything. So it took a while for them to actually get back in touch with parents, and some people unfortunately contacted us to say they had no contact from the visiting teacher. Now the visiting teacher is the liaison between school and student, so it's a crucial liaison, and a lot of the times the schools are waiting for guidance from VTs. Now I know it was something new that had, an unknown situation, but some VTs weren't really in touch with schools or in touch with pupils, so that extra piece was gone as well, which didn't help things. Access to materials is always an issue, but you can imagine how bad that was when kids were at home and they didn't have either their visualizer or their large print books or whatever format they used. But I think what was crucial about this whole thing is, and in a way it's a very negative thing, but it's a very positive thing. I think it was the first time a lot of parents actually realised how hard it is sitting in a class, made for the sighted majority for their children. It was the first time they really said, wow, this is really, really tricky. And hang on, what supports do my kids have? So while we would know a lot of this, often kids are in and out of school, they don't know any difference, so they think it's fine missing 2/3 of the class or 1/3 of the class. But when parents actually saw it, they realised what a mountain it is to climb when the correct supports aren't in place. And while COVID is a terrible situation, it's highlighted a situation that's kind of been ongoing in the schools for visually impaired kids for the last 6 or 7 years. The VT service was to be overhauled. There was a big report done 6 years ago, and while they said it is a key service, which it is, there were changes to be made. None of those changes got made. Also, with the new allocation model, which the department brought in a model where in the old days, if you were at visual impairment, you would be entitled to 2.5 or 3 hours one-on-one resource with the teacher to catch up on everything. That's now been changed, which it needed to be changed for the whole system. It didn't need to be changed for visually impaired kids. So their access to resource has actually been greatly reduced. So if a child is missing out on something, it's very hard for them to get the one-on-one time to catch up on that, because who gets resource is decided by the principal, and that's on a basis of need. Because the needs of visually impaired students aren't well known because they are a minority disability, often principals and even special needs educators aren't aware of them because they haven't had a visually impaired child before. So they don't realise there's a whole set of extra skills that aren't on the curriculum that need to be got in order for them to survive the curriculum. So they'll say, but they're fine, they're reading, they're writing, they're actually grand, when actually they need to be learning to type, they need to be learning very good IT skills so they can manage folders and subjects and huge amounts of materials in second level. And all this has to be done in a resource setting because that's not what the whole class is doing. Now, a lot of those skills aren't being covered anymore. So the cracks in the system were really highlighted because you had kids at home who had probably got too dependent on SNAs, and therefore couldn't manage stuff themselves, and parents were realizing for the first time what a struggle it was in mainstream. So while it was a terrible thing, awareness is always a good thing because it's a point from which we can move forward and try and improve things.
Yes, certainly. It's highlighted a lot of problems and challenges in the current system. And you mentioned the report that was carried out a number of years ago, looking at ways to reform the visiting teachers service and to reform it. And it's probably more important than ever that that is implemented fully. But unfortunately, like happened during the last recession, there were a lot of cutbacks made. Do you fear, and does Feach fear that people with disabilities and educational supports and SNAs and resource teachers, do you think that they will be adequately resourced as we face into an economic recession? And what can we do to ensure that they are prioritised?
That's a really good question, Kevin. Yeah, obviously we always worry if things are like this when the economy was in a boom. You do go, oh my God, what is going to happen? But if you look at the government spending on special education, it's quite high. What I see as a major issue is the way spending is. They spend a lot of money, but they don't do it very well. For example, they'll give kids a very good piece of kit, like it'll cost 4 or 5 grand, but it's given to the child. There's no training given with it. The teachers don't know how to use it. The schools don't know how to use it. So in my opinion, there's an awful lot of things they could do with the current situation to improve it that doesn't need a lot of money thrown at it. For example, the visiting teachers could be given more support by other agencies who can help with the technological side of things. I mean, 6 or 7 years ago, the tech side of the VT's job was not that big. It is now massive, because things have improved. That's helped visually impaired kids. But if that section of is not managed properly, they have all the technology, but they're not getting the most from it. So unfortunately, the SNAs, I think, in a way, because they've changed the allocation model, our kids, unfortunately, are more dependent now on SNAs than they were before. And that is a real step backwards, because what we really want and advocate for our kids is independent learning. And something I would say to parents very strongly is there is no knight in shining armour to come in and save this for you. You need to get in there, be very proactive, and take a lot of control back. We know all these holes in the systems are there. They're not going to be fixed for a while. So I would go in and be very proactive with my child. And I would say, okay, my child has missed 3 months. What are we going to do to sort it out? A lot of the time, the school just doesn't know what they can be doing to support your child correctly. So it's a question of getting in there and having conversations. I think we now know that the latest from the visiting teachers is that they're only going to be visiting for essential services. So I think for the next while, they're not, it's not going to be business as usual. So I would advise people to get in and be as proactive as possible with schools and ensure that their child's needs that weren't met for the 3 months begin to be met. I know I've diverged from your question. I am concerned, but what does make me feel positive is parents are much more aware now, and I think they will be much more proactive. And if you have people, highlighting what's going on and highlighting and working with schools, we have a better chance of holding on to our resources. And if we could streamline them and get them work properly, we shouldn't really need that much extra, but we do need to hold on to what we are, but have it working properly for us. Because we are a minority disability, things need to be, our supports are different, and that needs to be recognised with the Department of Education.
The point you made, Eithne, around independent learning is really interesting, and I can just about recall my own days in secondary school. I won't reveal how many years ago that was at this particular stage, but one of the biggest adjustments in my whole educational journey following losing my sight during secondary school was I did have a lot of resources in place, and I was quite fortunate in that regard. But then when I went to third level, whilst there was lots of supports and the equipment was there, you really had to fend for yourself, and you had to be so much more independent. So it's really important that our kids are as independent as possible when they are at primary and second level, so that they can make that adjustment.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the worst thing you can do in a way is over support a child because you're actually disabling them. And I have two kids, so one is leaving cert, the other's junior cert. One came through the old system where she had more resource, and we worked on a plan to support withdrawal, and always have her prepared for the next stage. My second son was coming through, and he's come through on much less support, and he is much more dependent on his SNA, because when that support isn't there to make them independent, they need someone to help them all the time. So it's not only that, it's to be able to advocate for themselves. So to say, I actually can't see that, I need this made this size, and I just can't tell you what an example my kids are of how resources, while more money has been spent, resources for our kids are actually really diminishing. Now, new parents to the system don't realise this. They think this is how the system works. So it's really a case of having to arm the parents so they can go into the schools and get the supports that's needed for their kids. Because I suppose at this stage, I think I'm 16 years into it. I'm coming out the other side of it, and I really think you have to drive it yourself, because it's not going to come from, because it's a minority disability, and because they haven't changed the VT system or moved with the times with that. You really have to get up and do things yourself, and getting your kid to be independent and able to self-advocate is absolutely key.
Time now for a little bit of crystal ball gazing on our behalf. We're recording this just in advance of everyone returning to school at the start of September. And how are parents feeling about that? I'm sure in one regard they're relieved for children to be going back, but again, there's a lot of uncertainty. It's very unclear as to how it's going to work, and God forbid if there were to be partial closures of schools in a town or a region, or even worse, another lockdown and a complete closure of schools. Do you think the department are any more prepared?
Uh, Honestly, I don't want to worry parents, but I think it's going to be. I think it's a positive thing. The schools are open, okay, and I think we all need to take it 1 week at a time. Really take a diet on social media and stuff that's going out there. I think that what you need to do is kind of be very careful at the narrative at home, keep everything very positive, and ensure that your child is going in a positive manner, because the best place for them is school. I think communication with the school is very key, as in, you really need to explain that social distancing is very hard for kids who are visually impaired and blind, and exceptions have to be made around them so that their mobility, they can be mobile, move around the school and stuff like that. The feedback coming in from parents is that they're very worried, and that is totally to be understood. Like everything else, it's this huge variance of guidelines, or not guidelines, how the guidelines are interpreted. So some schools are all over it, and some schools are absolutely nowhere near it. Okay, so like I always say, arm yourself up, and you try and drive your child's support and drive their journey through school. We can only hope that they can that things will move forward in a positive way. But at the same time, what I would say to parents is really stay on top, stay in touch, because there is a lot of chaos out there, and schools don't really, it's new for them as well. A lot of them are doing the very best they can. So I think if you support your kid this side as well, it will really help. Yeah, so fingers crossed, and just kind of try and take it week by week, because like you say, we just don't know what's around the corner. But from our point of view, to have them back in school is such a positive, and that's what we want to hold on to.
And I'm sure you'll agree with me on this point. Parents reaching out and staying in contact with yourselves and FAIC or the NCBI children's team is so very important, because there will be unique challenges and issues arising around the country, and even in particular counties. And we all can learn and come up with coping strategies or left of field thinking to overcome some of these challenges if we all continue to keep communicating.
Absolutely. And I've always found the best advice I've always got is from other parents. We have a fake group page on Facebook now that's only for parents of blind and visually impaired kids, and it's a closed group. So parents, I would advise any parents, if they're feeling a little bit lost, isolated, or want advice, join that group. It's a very safe space, and honestly, you get so much knowledge there. And I think, for example, there's something we missed out on, which was July provision. And this was the first year that our kids were eligible for July provision. And so that was where they get extra support during the summer months, either via tuition, or there was some courses run by NCBI. So it's either in school, at home, or courses run by NCBI this summer. And it was absolutely brilliant. And that kind of came about with parents talking to each other and saying, let's go for this. And it's the power of a group of people coming together is massive. So it is all about talking and getting ideas from other people, trying to stay positive, but at the same time being proactive. Everything that we hear on the Facebook page, we feed back into the Department of Education. I'm in constant touch with the heads of the visiting teachers, and we're always trying to work with these groups to try and make everything better. So absolutely stay in touch. Use the social media support that's out there that is good and positive, and together we are much stronger. And like I said, this has been quite negative, but it's actually been so positive from the point of view of parents understanding what supports they need. And if we can take this as a base and move forward and get better support for our kids, it will actually all be well worth it.
Yeah, I know from speaking to my colleagues in the NCBI children's team, the camps were really successful, and it was great that NCBI was in a position to be able to provide that service. And hopefully going forward, one thing coming out of COVID is that children who are blind and vision impaired will be able to access July provision, and it won't be a one summer wonder. But before we wrap up, Eithne, what I was keen to speak about, because we've really focused on the educational challenges, but for children who are blind and vision impaired, really challenging to be out of the school setting, not being in contact with their friends, and I suppose really isolating, and being blind and vision impaired can be isolating at times also.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think, and that was a major issue again. I'm in this a long time, and it was the first time I really observed, wow, you know, um, going in and out of school gives kids great mobility. So when they weren't going in and out of school, their mobility went. When their mobility went, their confidence went. And it's all a big crescendo. Like, my son was used to walking the dog; he didn't want to walk the dog anymore. So these things are challenges that people wouldn't think of at all. So. Um, Connecting with people, keeping in touch with their peers it's a huge part of their education. Like, it's a huge part of everyone's education, but it is vital to keep in touch and to keep just even the chat and the banter going, because like you say, it is an extra isolation, and there is a lack of confidence that can get much bigger when you're at home by yourself. So to be out there, even going in and out of school, taking the bus, it's massive. And we can't underestimate what happens to kids when they're left at home by themselves.
Eithne, real pleasure speaking to you on the programme today, and I think as we said, we're entering another period of uncertainty, and hopefully, fingers crossed, things will go okay. But let's chat again in a few weeks as the situation evolves.
Yeah, absolutely. That was great, Kevin. And yeah, thanks for having us on.
That was Eithne Walsh, Advocacy Officer with Feach, in conversation with myself, Kevin Kelly. This podcast will be available on all the usual podcast platforms and across NCBI and Feach's social media.